We're starting in to Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion in this philosophy of religion class. Oh, this is YouTube, so who knows who's out there. This could get into the wrong hands because it's public. All right. The Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, which was published posthumously after Hume's death in 1776. I must say that I'm completely delighted by this book in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know if this is worthwhile, but in high school I was reading like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, trying to read Heidegger and Sartre. But while I was in high school, my high school didn't have any classes, but I took a philosophy, 101 at the community college, Montgomery College, outside of D.C. The prof's name was Blatch, I think. Does that sound right? Anyway, we read Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And I was completely bowled over by it. It's nothing like Nietzsche or Kierkegaard. It's arguments, man, and it's our species has not produced any better arguers than David Hume. Okay, and he just killed, right? And plus, I was an atheist. I interpreted it as an atheist text, which is actually somewhat complicated. We can mess around with that. But I'll tell you what, it systematically dismantles more or less every argument for the existence of God. It finally leaves you. It finally corners the theist in a dilemma. Not to show, in this case, that God doesn't exist, but just that there can be no good arguments for the existence of God, which would be awfully devastating to some theists anyway, not to others. All right, so here's I got a few things here. I don't know what order I'm going to take this in. Fideism. The view that the arguments are irrelevant, or even it's not good to have arguments, because we should believe on faith alone. And in some ways, Hume leaves you in the in a kind of atheist fideist quandary at the end. You can because he leaves you without any reasons to believe. Or arguments to establish the existence of God. The way he finally corners the theist here is there can be no a posteriori arguments for good a priori. There can be no good a posteriori arguments for the existence of God. Here's a whole bunch of arguments to that effect. Devastating ones. And there can be no good a priori arguments for the existence of God, such as the ontological argument that we've just been on for a week or two. And here's a battery of arguments, or here's a wipe out pretty quick argument why that can't be. There are no other kinds of arguments. All arguments are either a posteriori or a priori. Look on your handouts to make sure you got these concepts. So there are no good arguments. All right, but let's do a little context, okay? The book is in dialogue form. It's a little hard to start teasing that out, but I think if you just start reading, the characters fall into place, the arguments fall into place. Although it's somewhat. I mean, the art of reading it in part is figuring out where Hume is at any given moment. Who's speaking for the author on the supposition that anyone is. I mean, these could be like little portions of Hume's own consciousness, but not really, man. That dude was a religious skeptic, okay? An arch figure, a paradigmatic figure of the Enlightenment. I don't know how much intellectual history, kind of like normal European intellectual history you have. on board. But the Enlightenment period, generally thought of as the 18th century in Europe. Let's make it the 17th and 18th century in Europe. The rise of empirical science. This is the usual tale. Sir Isaac Newton being a pivotal figure. The rise of Cartesian and post-Cartesian philosophy. I mean, I might date the Enlightenment in some ways from Francis Bacon, or one might take it much later. It's generally characterized in terms of secularization, at least at the high end of the intellectual spectrum. It becomes possible to express doubts about religious teachings in a way that it was often not possible in previous centuries in Europe. David Hume did not publish this work during his lifetime, but he was notorious for being a religious skeptic during his lifetime. Another figure along these lines is the Frenchman Voltaire. And people were disgusted by them, but they were also very successful authors and stuff like this. Okay, Hume, a great historian for one thing. What an unbelievable man of letters, and sentence by sentence, what a writer! One of the best English prose stylists who's ever written. Okay, and in that sense, an ornament to philosophy. Okay, his contemporary Berkeley was quite good too, actually. Quite a good writer. Not so much Locke, though, maybe, of the three British empiricists. Okay, anyway, we're emphasizing this worldliness, like this kind of scientific orientation, maybe even drifting to flirting with materialist metaphysics and stuff like this, if you can imagine that emerging out of, hundreds of years of Christian culture, and various forms of independent critical assessment of the religion and theology that these people found themselves within. It becomes possible to. It's not. I don't think it's possible, and actually, the form of dialogues concerning natural religion shows this. It's probably not possible to even in Hume's lifetime, in the middle 18th century, to express straight up, there is no God. God is dead. That needs another 100 years to get you to Nietzsche or whatever. By the late 19th century, you can say any damn thing, okay? About all of that. And the religious consensus of Europe has fragmented beyond belief. All right, and come into doubt in 1,000 different directions by the late 19th century. So we have a full-scale sort of independent application of reason here to try to assess the arguments for God's existence. It doesn't necessarily have to turn out one way or another, supposedly. All right. Okay. Now, let's, so these are the dialogues concerning natural religion. I'm sorry, my cat seems to be going crazy. As opposed to revealed religion. I mean, I think that's the way to understand this phrase, natural religion. It's not the religion of nature or something like that, which might have been Spinoza's religion, maybe. But it's religion insofar as we can figure out the nature of God and stuff like this in our situation here on earth, without receiving a miraculous revelation from God. So let's, to hit the natural religion, let's bracket the question whether, enclose the question, leave aside the question of whether God has written a book and stuff like this, or has revealed directly to anyone that he exists, what he is, and so on. Natural religion, how, as opposed to revealed. And so let's even hold off on the scripture for a second. And let's think how far like reasoning or even science could get us toward a belief in God. Because certainly many people, most people, the consensus in a way in the Enlightenment period is that, you know, reason is developing in all these independent ways, you know, like as science is developing, but it's all actually compatible with a God-centered or God-created universe. In fact, it's showing, I mean, Newton thought this among many others, you know, it's showing the miracle of God's creation as we study the material universe. All right. um, the main focus of the dialogues concerning natural religion are, I guess, like sort of natural arguments, I suppose, like this worldly secular arguments. Secular? Well, with a religious point, anyway. The argument from design and its evil twin, the problem of evil. Okay. You know, I mean, just real quick, the argument from design being like, look at this world. And all kinds of people were running this and running it also with regard to the new discoveries of science and so on. Like, you know, so when Newton discovered these physical laws or set them out systematically or mathematized them or something like that, you know, what he thought is like, okay, I've discovered like how God created the universe, right? Like the laws of God. And, you know, one question, and it's a question in the dialogues concerning natural religion and elsewhere in this, all these debates, including Paley, who we'll also read. If I'm discovering laws of the universe, laws that govern every object in the universe and stuff like this, can there be a law? Can there be laws without a lawgiver who gave the universe these laws? I mean, it sounds like a political analogy. Right. So now, okay, who was the legislative body? Who was the legislator that passed the laws of physics? You know, and then you're right at God. The argument from design is just like, but the most basic statement of it is just like, look around you, man. How beautiful. How well these things fit together. Look at the balance of nature or something like this. You know, look at the beauty of it, perhaps. The elaborateness of it. The suitedness of various parts to one another in a system, whether it's a solar system or an organism. The complexity of any given organism with its sensory organs and its, you know, the ways it moves and everything like this, and the way that all works together. That can only be the result of design. And then the evil twin of the argument from design is like, oh yeah, if this thing is made by a, you know, benevolent and powerful being, why does it suck so bad? And now, suck so bad can mean a bunch of things in the problem of evil, or several different things. Why do people suffer undeservedly? Why is there injustice in the universe? A universe created by, let's say, an all-powerful and just God. Right? So if there's an all-powerful and just God, you know, if there's an all-powerful God, then if there's injustice, God wants that injustice. Seemingly. But how can he if he's a just God? So why is there injustice? And Hume's statement of the problem of evil, which I'll just state, you know, completely systematically, it's quick, it's a killer, is the paradigmatic statement of the problem of evil, sharp as a tack, which is definitely not to say that there is no possible response to it. Responses to the problem of evil, or explanations of evil, let's say undeserved suffering, for example, uh, explanations of that in accordance with, while also holding on to the existence of a perfectly good God, are known as theodicies. That should be up here, maybe theodicies. And we will go elaborately through one sort of theodicy that takes you through free will, and we'll go through John Hick's soul-making theodicy. But anyway, now I'm just like previewing. All right. So the lion's share of the dialogues concerning natural religion is concerned with evaluating the argument from design, which in a way is the most intuitively plausible, I think, or the most immediate and maybe the most common argument for God's existence, at least in the contemporary world. Even still, versions of it, although it's had to change in certain ways, maybe in the face of, for example, Darwinian evolution. And maybe it's the most intuitively plausible. It's something you can explain to a child, for example, where it's like, try the ontological argument out on a kindergartner and see how it goes, right? And sometimes you're trying to persuade children that God exists, right? Because you're a Sunday school teacher or something like that. And you could use the, look at this, man. Only God can make a tree, right? Like, wow, I mean, check it out. So it's, and in some ways, okay, so it has its limitations. It is a posteriori, and it establishes at most, it would establish, if it was a good argument, it would establish at most that God's existence is probable, more probable than not. Right? It doesn't establish the existence of a necessary being or something like that, a la the ontological argument. And it doesn't exactly establish the existence of an omnipotent or perfectly good being either. What it could establish, probably, is that, what it could establish, if it could establish anything, is that there's a being adequate to create a universe like this one, with whatever degree of beauty it may have, whatever degree of intelligent design it may display. Anyway, it has its limitations as an argument, but it has its strengths too, and including intuitive plausibility and ease of statement. And I think Hume actually thinks that the other arguments for God's existence, including the ontological argument, including the cosmological argument, can be disposed of pretty easily. But the argument from design is more difficult. Okay, so there's three. I guess I'll just say there's three characters, primary characters. There's a couple of ancillary, the narrator and so on, characters that, confusingly enough, were the first introduced. This is quite like a number of Plato dialogues, actually, where you go like, oh, I was talking to him, and he told me about Socrates or whatever, and Hume sets it up that way. Here's a conversation that I overheard. Okay, anyway. Philo is one character. He's portrayed as a religious skeptic. Hume himself is often called a skeptic. I should say Scottish Enlightenment, too, by the way. He's a Scottish dude. Which makes, and he called himself a skeptic, which might make you think that Philo speaks for Hume, and I don't think that would be far wrong for the most part. There are places where both of the other characters, Cleanthes and Demea, carry the weight of Hume's argument, I think. Often that's signaled by Philo's agreement with them, actually, on particular points. It's a sort of complex terrain. The character Demea is portrayed as a minister who just will not hear kind of religious doubts, or like almost a religious dogmatist in a certain way. And interestingly, the dogmatist and the skeptic end up on the same side of a number of the arguments. And then Cleanthes, who is kind of a Enlightenment figure himself. He's saying that the use of reason, science, close observation of the universe confirms the existence of God in a variety of ways. One thing he might be fooling with is a popular Enlightenment position. I mean, one of the major problems of the Enlightenment could be just cast as squaring theology with empirical science. And one of the main strategies for that is this position, deism. The philosopher Descartes is probably well conceived, well thought of to be is probably a deist. Okay. The basic position being like God set this universe in motion, perhaps like a clockwork, it's sometimes said, and then let it go on its own. Now, Jefferson had that position. Franklin, maybe. The real popular Enlightenment style position. Okay. Now, why that sound like okay? So why would you cut God off right there, like at the creation, like that? This is called maybe the Deus absconditus, the God who split. The God who ditched. Well, why? If you have God, why not just say, oh yeah, he's in the background there somewhere all day? And the reason that you do, you want to make this move, and Cleanthes sort of makes this move as it goes on, is that it allows you to treat the universe as a natural or independently scientifically studyable physical system, right? Completely governed by physical laws that can be discovered by empirical means. There's no God turning water into wine or something like that right here, right now. You see what I mean? It is a physical system that's fully scientifically describable. It was set in motion by some kind of deity. Because if you said it wasn't, then you'd be straight up atheist. And even that, and even in the and certainly in the 18th century, certainly in the 17th century, but even in the 18th century, that makes you a monster. Okay, so you at least concede that we need a God to set this thing in motion. But it's becoming more and more evident as, through these scientific victories or whatever, that we don't need a God to explain any particular physical event or any, change in the environment. So, for example, there's a drought this year. One interpretation is God is angry with us, right? There's a snowstorm in Texas. God is angry with the Texans. I don't doubt that for a second. No, God bless Texas, right? If heaven ain't a lot like Texas, I don't want to go. But maybe not this weekend, okay? Where did I start that thought? All right. Okay, so look, if Texas got visited with a snowstorm, we can give a fully natural explanation of that, right? A fully physical explanation of it. We don't need to resort to God's will. And in the 18th century, let's say, that's becoming more and more evident. Like we will eventually be able to do some meteorology, and we won't, and there's not going to be a lot of point in warding off the blizzard by prayer. Okay. And that's as true if you're an atheist, materialist, but it's also true if you're a deist. You expect the physical system to proceed by physical laws, and we're going to see a theodicy that centralizes that, John Hick's soul-making theodicy, which actually holds that the best situation for testing the human soul is a system with regular physical laws that are inviolable. So deism gives you God, but not a God that interferes or answers particular prayers or changes, interferes in the order of nature to perform miracles or suspends the laws of physics for a second. Because if you have a God like that, then you have a universe that cannot be scientifically studied. So Cleanthes's position in the dialogues concerning natural religion is that kind of like reasonable theism. A theism based on reason, that he thinks, things like the argument from design get you to, a plausible belief in God. And also articulating a theism that's compatible with newly rising scientific or scientistic or even materialist worldviews. All right. So, and interestingly, the skeptic and the dogmatist are united at times against that reasonable view. Because the skeptic's going, no. This is not reasonable. If you're believing that stuff, let me show you that that's not, you're not going to reason yourself to God. And the dogmatist is going, yeah, you're not going to reason yourself to God. God is incomprehensible. So stop your pride that says you're going to figure out whether God exists. Little man, little Cleanthes. And just believe. Just have faith. Right? Maybe I don't want your reasonable God and your reasonable belief in God. I want a total commitment or something like this. And so the skeptic and the maybe the skeptic and the dogmatist end up both with a kind of fideism. That is, this, first of all, this reasonable religion is kind of impoverished. And second of all, it's not as reasonable as it appears, because actually the arguments cannot be sustained. And so if we believe in God, maybe this is where Hume leaves you kind of, or Philo leaves you. If you're going to believe in God, it's going to have to be on pure faith alone, because reason just ain't going to get you there. And so whether he leaves you saying like, actually, I think probably there is no God, there's certainly no good reasons to believe there is, or whether he leaves you with, you must believe on faith alone, because of course no one would deny that God exists. The degree of Hume's sincerity in the last, little bit is a famous quandary. All right, we'll get into the details. So start by reading the William Paley Watchmaker. I meant to read that when I was briefly on the argument from design. So Paley's little argument, and it's a version of the argument from design that Hume attacks, though Paley's text is a bit later than Hume, or 50 years later than Hume. The basic thing is, if I found a pebble, I wouldn't need an explanation. I wouldn't demand an explanation. If I was walking on the heath, man, go out for a walk on the heath. And where's the heath? If I was walking on the heath and I found a pebble, interesting, whatever, it might be a nice pebble. If I'm walking on the heath and I find a pocket watch, I have to infer that an intelligent being left it there, and that it is the product of an intelligent design. Primarily, I'm inferring that because I can see what it's for. But imagine a case where I've never seen a watch before. I've never seen a watch before. Still, if I found a watch on the beach or on the heath, I go like, oh, this is not a natural object. Okay, this didn't just fall from the sky as a weird form of precipitation. This is not the seed of that tree over there. This is something somebody made. And the universe as a whole is like a watch. There's the premise. The universe is like a watch. The universe is like a house. What's the best analogy here? Or is the universe more like a lizard? There's a Hume question. But we might be resting this thing, this version of the teleological argument, which is one kind of argument from design, rests on an analogy of the universe as a whole to an artifact that displays the evident signs of having been intelligently designed for some purpose. So it's an a posteriori argument, like I say, and we might think of it as also on handout, an abductive argument, an argument from analogy. That's at least one form of the argument from design. The universe is like a watch in being extremely intricate, elaborate, with the parts fitting together in certain ways. Think of the solar system perhaps as a clockwork. The universe is like a watch in these ways. So hence the universe is like a watch in this further way, that such a thing can only arise by intelligent design. Things A and B are alike in respects F, G, and H. Therefore, they're alike in respect I. An argument from analogy. Well, that's a pretty loose kind of argument. It's certainly not an ontological argument, knockdown style ontological argument or something. But anyway, read the first couple parts of this as well as the Paley. And I'll see you on Zoom on Tuesday. I guess we're still Zooming.